Hi everybody, I'm Ali, and it's been a long time that I didn't record any new videos, but it's okay as I'm okay. So, in this video, we're going to learn almost anything about Agile development and Scrum in the shortest time. So, if you're a web developer or web designer, or let me say you're a programmer, and you're working on your own, you're a freelancer, or working in a team in any scale, and you're wondering what is Agile development all about, then this video is for you. Why? Because Agile development, which Scrum is one of the most popular Agile techniques, helps you build better, faster, and more efficiently software systems. So if you're ready, let's just dive in. Okay, so let's learn Scrum in simple terms. So what do we mean by Agile development? Before I come to that, let's just imagine that for your project you have designed 4 different phases, which are analyze, design, code, and test. In old school waterfall process, you have to do each of these steps one by one before you proceed to the next step. So what is the problem with this kind of process? The problem is that what if something changes at the middle of the project? Well, you have to go all the way back to the first step and then repeat again everything from the beginning. So in Agile development process, this problem doesn't exist. Why? Because you first define different pieces for your project and then do all of the needed steps for your project. So as you can see in this picture, we have defined different sprints. I will explain about sprints later, but just to mention what are they about. Each sprint is actually a period of time to provide some sort of functionality. So anyway, you first define different sprints and then you would do all of the required steps for each sprint. So if anything happens at the middle of the way, you just need to repeat that specific sprint, and it doesn't affect the whole project. So in Agile development, you're actually agile. Agile methods use an iterative approach to a project with tight feedback loops that enable rapid adaptation when a new information or requirement for the project becomes available. So actually, as an adapter, you accept the fact that change may happen. So you adapt yourself along the way as the project is moving forward. So, okay, let's go and see what is Scrum. Scrum is one of the most popular Agile techniques. In this video, I won't go and explain about its history, but I provide a link in the description of the video so that if you like to learn more about it, you go and check it out. But here we just focus on what's practically important for us so that we can use the technique in our projects. So let's just move forward and see why do we need Scrum. Well, let's just first see what are the problems with the traditional waterfall process. Well, teams work completely independent from each other. So if a problem happens and an issue rises on one team, it blocks the whole production line, because everything has been predicted from the beginning, and when an issue happens, the whole team needs to go all the way back to the first step and analyze everything from the beginning. Now, in a traditional waterfall process, everything is decided up front. And the problem with that is that in reality, everything may change at the middle of the project. Our client may change her mind. And well, it's not her fault, it's just the way things are. So if we decide to move on for our project and choose the waterfall process for our project, then we'll face huge problems when the client changes her mind at the middle of the project. Okay, another problem with the traditional waterfall process is weak estimations. Because unforeseen issues always arise, like bugs or client requirements, our estimations about when the project is going to get completed get weaker and weaker as the project gets bigger and bigger. Now, Scrum aims to fix all of these issues. It promotes transparency, inspecting and evaluating the project's process, adapting to the project's requirements along the way. Now, let's see who are these Scrum team major players. Product owner, as her name defines, she is responsible for the overall project, and she decides what features are important and prioritize the tasks that Scrum developers need to take care of. And she is the one who actually contacts stakeholders frequently. Scrum developers, they are the ones who code and test the software. The team consists of designers, front-end developers, back-end developers, and etc. They are the ones who actually get into details and take care of the tasks that product owner defines. Scrum Master. He is the communication bridge between Scrum developers and product owner. He has a strong technical knowledge and actively participate into the tasks that Scrum developers are taking care of, but he doesn't get into details so much. His actually duty is to organizing the sprint rituals and removing impediments and preventing unplanned works to be worked on. Okay, so now let's go and see how is the Scrum process. So, unlike the waterfall process, we don't work on the project from start to finish. Instead, we divide the project into different pieces according to the product backlog and start working on each piece in a short period of time known as a sprint. And what is product backlog? I will explain about it later, but let me just mention a little bit about it right here. It's an ordered list of the tasks that need to be done to deliver the final product. So, generally speaking, you have a huge project, you cut it down into pieces and take care of each piece in a single sprint. Now, in a single sprint, you have different tasks that they need to be done by the end of the sprint, and each sprint, which is a short period of time, can be, for example, a week or 2 weeks. So, at the middle of each sprint, some unknown issues may happen, such as some bugs or some sort of requirements that your team understands that they need them so that they can complete the tasks. So we call these unknown issues unplanned tasks. Now, you don't need to necessarily change your plan for your current sprint. You just can simply put any unplanned tasks for the next sprint. So in overall, Scrum technique can help your team actually do better teamwork, provide early feedbacks, and have a constant speed of development and eventually build a better product. Now, in Scrum, we would have a planning board. It's a board on a wall, or it can be a software for remote teams that has some columns, and you put your tasks on it. It actually helps your team to have an overview of the whole project and an overview for the current sprint that they are working on. Now, in Scrum, we can optionally have a chart called Burndown chart. It helps us measure our speed of development in a single sprint. So you have a huge project, and especially in your first or second sprints, you understand that so many unplanned tasks are rising up, and by the end of the sprint your team sees that, wow, they couldn't even complete half of the tasks that they were supposed to be done with them by the end of the sprint. Let me say something. These things are completely normal, and don't panic, okay? Actually, this is why the burn down chart exists, and it can help you to make better estimations for your next sprints and help your team to have a better performance. I will explain about Burndown chart later as we're going on. Now there's a note here that we need to make into consideration, and it's that a Scrum team is recommended to consist of between 4 and 9 members in total for better performance. So larger physical teams can split into several smaller Scrum teams. Okay, let's move forward and see what is product backlog. As I mentioned earlier, product backlog is an ordered list of the tasks that need to be done so that we can deliver the final product. It actually be maintained and be defined by our client, or let me say product owner, according to the things that she thinks she needs for her project, and it can change at the middle of the project because our client may change her mind time to time. We don't know. Okay, so that's why I here mentioned that the product backlog is actually a living list which grows and shrinks and changes as the project is being developed. Okay, so let's see what is sprint. Now, what is a sprint? As I mentioned earlier, it's a basic unit of development in Scrum. I mean, each piece of our project need to be done in a single sprint. A sprint should be more than a day long and less than 1 month. It's commonly 1 or 2 weeks long. And by the end of each sprint, our product should be in a stable state. Now you may be wondering, how is that possible to make a stable product after 1 or 2 weeks? Well, it's possible because of some rules that we will use, and we call them sprint rituals. I will explain about them later. What is user story? A user story is a short one-sentence definition of a feature or functionality. It's actually a functionality, a feature that the user who is using our application, our software, expects. Okay? A user can be a system administration manager or our client. So our client, product owner, tells us some stories about how she likes us to do the job for her. And this is our duty to make her stories into reality by delivering the product that she likes. What is planning board? As I mentioned earlier, it can be a whiteboard which is placed on a wall, or it can be a software which has several columns. And the number of columns differ from project to project. It's all up to you. And actually in each column the developer team put some sticky notes that each sticky note represents a user story, a task. So as the team works on the project, they move their sticky notes from column to another column so that the other team members can see exactly what's going on in the project, and the Scrum Master can have overview of what's going on in the whole project and the current sprint that the team is working on. We will explain about it in more details later again. Now, how to estimate the amount of work that can be done in a single sprint? That's a tricky question. We have our product backlog, we have our user stories. Product owner has her own priorities, has her own concerns, and knows what tasks need to be done first, but deciding on which user stories need to be picked up for our upcoming sprint is still a little bit complicated practically. So in order to understand our velocity and be able to make more accurate estimations regarding how much tasks we can take care of in a single sprint, which is a 1 week or 2 weeks sprint, there are some ways that we're going to take a look at right now. Story points. It's one of the most common methods for estimating stories. So we can use Fibonacci numbers to represent a story complexity, like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and maybe 13, but a 13-sized story seems too big. Or we can use powers of 2, like 1, 2, 4, 8, and maybe 16. So we take a look at our project and pick up the simplest story that can be achieved easier than any other tasks. And we give this story point number 1. Now, according to this story, we can estimate the rest of our stories. Okay, so if the simplest story is number 1, then a story which is a little bit more complex than that can be number 2, and we go further just like that. But please note that you should never associate story points with time. For example, giving a 2-hour task 2 points because it takes 2 hours is wrong. Points should never ever relate to time. Why? Because as experienced teams have tested, this will make the estimation even worse. For example, in my own experience, I saw that designers and developers that feel stressed cannot do their own jobs more efficiently. When they see that, for example, the task that they are working on right now has point number 2 and the points are related to time, for example 2 hours, they all the time feel stressed. When designers and developers are relaxed, they can do their job more efficiently. So if you relate the points to time, you make the estimation even worse. Okay. The other way is to use semaphores. We can associate stories with colors instead of numbers to define the complexity level of a story. So for example, a green story defines an easy task, a yellow story is a little bit more complex task, and a red story is a task that, for example, cannot be achieved in a single sprint. You can use any colors that you would like. It doesn't matter. T-shirt sizes. We can use sizes like S, M, L, XL, XXL for our stories. This technique simply gives up on comparing story complexity with time of completion. I myself prefer T-shirt sizes for most of my projects. And please note that estimation is a really important thing to consider, because product owner and stakeholders need to know what to expect at the end of each sprint so that they can make other decisions, for example, like when to release a beta version or a final version, and etc. Okay, let's go to the next part and see what is Burndown chart. It's a chart that shows us our speed of development in a sprint. So, as an example, imagine we have a 5-day sprint that 10 points of tasks need to be done within it. The red line represents our actual speed of development, and the green line represents the ideal speed of the development. At the end of each day in a sprint, a team member volunteers to calculate the remaining points and draw the actual speed of development line, the red line. And yes, finding the remaining points is an easy job to do if all of the developers move their own stories from column to column on the planning board, and I will explain about the planning board later as we're going on. Our speed of development is ideal when the red line is close to the green line as we go on. So the closer, the more ideal. And don't forget to be agile. In most of the projects, after the first sprint, you may get disappointed because you may see that your developers couldn't finish even half of the tasks that they were supposed to be done with by the end of the sprint. But don't panic, it's completely normal, it's okay. If something like this happens, it actually helps you to make better estimations for the next sprint. So for the next sprint, you may pick only 5 points for a 5-day sprint. And this time you may finish all the points too early. This is again not ideal, because what your team needs to do while the sprint is still going on. Should they add more points? No, they cannot redraw their lines on the chart again. But again, there's no worries. Eventually, after 3 or 4 sprints, you can easily make an average of the last charts in order to specify how many points your team can finish for the next sprint. And there's a note here. Remember that measuring velocity is not for judging the team, but it's for making better estimations over time. Okay, let's get to the next part. Let's understand planning board better in an example. So, imagine we have a board that consists of 4 columns. The product backlog column is the column that all of the project's stories rest in. The sprint backlog is the column that the stories that we are working on at the current sprint rest in. The working on column that itself can be divided into smaller columns like design, development, and testing is the column that team members put stories on it from the sprint backlog. This is actually needed for transparency and improving productivity so that other team members can easily
understand that what others are working on right now in the current sprint. The done column is the column that all of the completed and achieved stories rest in it. Now, also take that into consideration that this is just an example. These columns and these smaller columns for the main column working on, these are all up to you, and they can vary from project to project. There's no worries. Just feel free to have your own columns and names for them. There's no problem with that. One thing that is very important that I need to mention is the definition of done. I mean, what do you mean by a done story, and when exactly can you put a story in the done column? This is what I also mentioned right here, the definition of done. In our project, we should clearly state that what do we mean by done? What do we mean when we call a story done? For example, you can consider a story as done when all of the following steps are done with it, such as analyze data, draw a sketch, create GUI mockup, and go on until, for example, compile and publish. So when all of these steps are done with a story, you can simply call that story, you can simply call that task a done one. Okay, so let's go back to the planning board right here. And as a team member, when I see some stories are resting in the done column, I can be simply confident that all of the steps that are needed for my project are all done with this story, that now this story is resting in the done column. So, and don't forget to be agile. If after one sprint or two sprints you have found out that some steps need to be added, just feel free to add some steps. Or the opposite, if you have felt that some steps are not needed, just feel free to remove those steps. These are all up to you and can be vary from project to project. There's no worries about that. Now, feel free to organize your own planning board and your sticky notes according to what you need for your project. So as an example, I explain right here what I have done for my sample planning board. So I have defined user stories with yellow sticky notes, and because user stories may be a complicated task to do, I have divided it into smaller tasks and defined the tasks with light blue sticky notes. And when a small task is done, I have defined it with green sticky note. And let me mention that this done is different with what we put in the done column. This done simply defines that a task that belongs to a user story is done right now. But when a user story passes all of the needed steps, which are, for example, in my sample, design, development, and testing, and when a user story passes all of the done definition steps, then it can be put on the done column. Okay, now as we're moving on and the developer team is working on these stories of the current sprint, some bugs may rise up, and tracking down bugs is very important for a project. So I have defined bugs in red sticky notes. And again, some activities may also rise up when the team is working on the stories of the current sprint. These activities are not directly related to a task or user story. And these activities, for example, can be something like installing a third-party application or anything else. So I have defined such activities with light green sticky notes. And for transparency, to see which team member is working on what story, you can also write down that team member's name on each sticky notes, or like what I did here, just stick a bookmark on that specific story. These are all just optional, and you can do whatever you need to do for your own project. Okay, let's get to the next part, and it's introducing sprint rituals. As we know, after each sprint, our product should be in a stable state. But how is that possible? Well, we need some rules and meetings which are called sprint rituals. One of the Scrum sprint rituals is sprint planning, another one is stand-up, another one is sprint review, and sprint retrospective. So let's go up all the way here and let's see what is sprint planning. Sprint planning occurs at the start of the sprint. We have a product backlog, and our team decides to pick up some of the high priority tasks from there and put them as the tasks that they need to be done by the end of the sprint, which can be a 1 week or 2 weeks sprint. How long does it take? This meeting can take a whole day, but shorter sprints only need a couple of hours or so. What are its results? Well, the result of this sprint is our sprint backlog, which consists of the tasks that have been taken from the product backlog. So by the end of this meeting, our team clearly knows what they need to deliver by the end of the sprint. Stand up occurs early in the day at an exact hour. So during a sprint, every day we will have a stand-up meeting. In a stand-up meeting, each team member should answer to these 3 questions: what you have achieved yesterday, what you will achieve today, and are there any problems blocking you? Scrum Master should help to solve the blocking problems and impediments. Sometimes the problems can be solved in a timely manner, but other times there might be a serious issue that can be solved in 1 or 2 weeks. But whatsoever, resolving any blocking issue that is preventing the development process should be the team's high priority. How long does it take? Well, stand-up should be fairly quick, and that's why we call it a stand-up meeting, because each team member actually stands up and answers to those 3 questions in just a couple of minutes. And if you have seen that some of the team members are looking for a chair to sit down, you might think that maybe the meeting has gone too far. What are the results of this meeting? Well, transparency and identifying the impediments. Sprint review. This is actually the only sprint ritual that the whole Scrum team should be present in it. And when it occurs, well, it occurs at the end of the sprint. Developers, Scrum Master, and Product Owner discuss what has been achieved in the past sprint, and a demo should be presented to the Product Owner that actually showcase the newly added features. How long does it take? Well, not more than an hour or so, but it depends on the number of features that you have added and the way you like to showcase your demo. What are its results? Well, based on the demo, product owner can decide whether to release a demo version or a new version of the application, and etc. Sprint retrospective. This meeting occurs at the end of the sprint, just like the sprint review meeting. But unlike the sprint review meeting, this meeting is only needed for the Scrum Master and developers. So in this meeting, developers provide feedback about what went well in the past sprint and what went badly. There are no right or wrong answers here. Developers simply give their own opinions, and they should put aside their own personal feelings. How long does it take? It's a short meeting that wouldn't take more than an hour if there were no serious issues. What are its results? Well, by the end of this meeting, if there were any issues that were bothering team members, the team propose a solution for any problem. So actually, this is the meeting that the team takes a look at their burndown chart and to see how they have performed in the past sprint. And this is the meeting that they can decide whether to take more or less tasks for the upcoming sprint. And what's next? Well, there's always be a next in any topic that we like to cover in this life, and the topic that we have covered in this video, Scrum, is just not an exception. So I will provide a link in this video's description so that you can go and check it out to learn even more about Scrum and Agile development in more details.
So, in this video, I tried to cover almost anything about Agile development and Scrum as the most popular Agile techniques. I explained about Scrum benefits, Scrum's major players, making better time estimations, burndown chart, planning board, and Scrum rituals. So, if you liked this video, please like it. I really appreciate that, and comment below to let me know your ideas and to support me. I really appreciate if you also subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell notification to be notified about my upcoming videos and tutorials. See you soon. Love you all. Bye bye.